Today is day 59 since Nancy Guthrie went missing without her daily cardiac medication. And today, the federal media blackout points to a classified intelligence intercept. The 84-year-old mother of broadcast journalist Savannah Guthrie requires a functioning pacemaker to survive. Every single hour escalates the physiological stakes of this abduction. Savannah Guthrie has officially suspended her television broadcast duties to handle this ongoing crisis. She initially made desperate public pleas for her mother to be returned safely. Those public appeals have abruptly and completely ceased across all media platforms. Federal agents are currently enforcing a strict operational silence regarding the entire investigation. This sudden transition from highly public desperation to total secrecy indicates a severe shift in the threat matrix. The central question is no longer just about who took the elderly woman from her residence. The defining question of this case is exactly what classified intelligence the Federal Bureau intercepted to force this absolute silence. Investigators are not keeping quiet because they lack actionable forensic data to share. They are maintaining silence as a tactical maneuver against a highly sophisticated adversary. This channel tracks the most complex federal investigations utilizing precise data analysis. You should subscribe to Tracking Evil with John to ensure your notifications remain active for all future briefings. The moment the federal gag order lifts, we will immediately analyze the unsealed court documents. We must examine the current forensic data to understand the magnitude of this threat. A standard financial kidnapping operates on a predictable timeline of demands and negotiations. The perpetrators establish proof of life to secure their demanded capital from the family. This specific abduction violates all established protocols of a standard hostage situation. The silence from the captors is just as deafening as the silence from federal authorities. The absence of medical intervention for the hostage transforms this from a kidnapping into an active countdown. Investigators are currently operating under the assumption that the perpetrators possessed advanced knowledge of the digital infrastructure. The attackers did not simply break into a residence and remove a random target. They executed a coordinated digital and physical extraction designed to evade immediate detection. The precise methodology of this extraction reveals the sophisticated nature of the individuals responsible. The physiological deterioration of an 84-year-old patient without prescribed medication follows a strict medical timeline. Cardiac failure becomes an exponential probability. With each passing day, the hostage remains missing. The federal agents leading this task force understand the biological limitations of their hostage perfectly. Their refusal to utilize national media networks suggests they are communicating through secure back channels. They might be managing an undisclosed threat escalation directed specifically at the prominent family members. High-profile media figures often attract obsessive individuals who harbor deep psychological grievances. The federal silence serves to deprive the perpetrators of the public attention they likely desire. The chronological data of the abduction provides a rigid, structural framework for the investigation. On January 31st at 9:50 p.m., Tommaso Cioni and his wife dropped Nancy Guthrie off at her Catalina Foothills residence. The residential garage door closed without any documented physical anomalies or signs of distress. The subsequent timeline shifts entirely from physical witness testimony to electronic surveillance records. At 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, the exterior doorbell camera was permanently disabled. A masked suspect captured on infrared footage manually severed the optical connection to the network. This suspect wore an Ozark trail hiker backpack and carried a flashlight in their mouth. The severance of the visual feed created a blind spot for the physical extraction. The most critical forensic data point occurred exactly 41 minutes later inside the home. At 2:28 a.m., the mobile application monitoring the cardiac pacemaker permanently lost its telemetry connection. This specific digital event establishes the exact moment the victim was removed from the physical proximity of her mobile device. Law enforcement received notification of the disappearance at 12:03 p.m. later that day. Family members dialed emergency services after the victim failed to attend a scheduled virtual church service. The 12-hour gap between the visual camera severance and the emergency dispatch provided the perpetrators with a massive geographical advantage. The investigation immediately transitioned from a local missing persons inquiry into a federal kidnapping response. The data points from the initial crime scene establish a narrative of extreme precision. The Absolute precision of the timeline contradicts the chaotic nature of a typical home invasion. The attackers knew exactly which digital tethers needed to be severed to delay the police response. The distance required to break a Bluetooth connection between a medical implant and a base station is highly specific. This measurement provides federal agents with a definitive radius of movement during the extraction window. The suspects did not destroy the mobile phone inside the residence during the intrusion. They simply moved the human target beyond the communicative range of the local wireless network. This calculated decision prevented the medical monitoring company from receiving an immediate critical alert. The digital silence perfectly preceded the physical disappearance of the hostage into the night. We must now dissect the exact technological parameters of that severed telemetry connection. The digital footprint of the victim provides the most reliable timeline of the abduction. A modern cardiac pacemaker functions as an internal transmitter of continuous physiological data. It communicates directly with a paired mobile device located within a specific physical perimeter. The standard operational radius for this low-energy Bluetooth telemetry is approximately 30 feet. Once the medical device crosses that physical threshold, the digital connection is permanently severed. The application log confirms this precise severance occurred at exactly 2:20. The mobile phone remained entirely stationary inside the residence during the entire suspected timeline. The perpetrators did not disable the cellular device to prevent internal tracking software. They physically transported the 84-year-old victim outside the established communication perimeter. This data point establishes the exact moment the extraction vehicle departed the immediate area. We must analyze the 41-minute gap between the camera and the pacemaker. The visual feed from the exterior doorbell terminated at exactly 1:47. The suspect required 41 minutes to secure the victim and breach the perimeter. This duration indicates a highly methodical approach rather than a rapid, chaotic home invasion. The attackers controlled the environment completely before initiating the physical removal of the hostage. They understood the technological parameters of the medical equipment monitoring the elderly target. Leaving the mobile device behind was a calculated decision to delay the emergency response. If the phone had traveled with the victim, the GPS module would remain active. Law enforcement could have tracked the cellular pings across multiple residential tower networks. By abandoning the receiving device, the perpetrators effectively blinded the digital tracking grid. The resulting data void forced investigators to rely entirely on static physical evidence. The timeline was executed with a level of military precision rarely seen locally. The medical monitoring company receives instant alerts for acute cardiac failure or irregular rhythms. They do not automatically dispatch emergency medical services for a dropped Bluetooth synchronization. A lost connection usually indicates the patient simply walked into coming into another room without their phone. The perpetrators exploited this specific vulnerability within the medical alert monitoring protocol. They understood the difference between a physiological alarm and a mere connectivity error. This sophisticated understanding of medical technology suggests extensive prior surveillance of the target. The attackers mapped the digital vulnerabilities of the residents well before the actual extraction. They knew exactly how to silence the electronic witnesses without triggering immediate external alarms. The 41 minutes inside the operational zone were likely spent ensuring absolute silence. The suspect captured on the infrared camera displayed a distinct lack of urgency. Holding a flashlight in their mouth indicates they required both hands for a specific task. They dismantled the visual security apparatus with deliberate and practiced mechanical efficiency. The subsequent removal of the victim from the 30-foot telemetry zone was equally methodical. The exact distance from the suspected bedroom to the exterior street parking is crucial. Federal investigators are currently measuring the precise signal degradation points within the residential architecture. They are correlating the physical layout of the home with the digital severance timestamp. This reconstructs the physical path the perpetrators took while removing the hostage. The data confirms the victim was moved steadily and continuously away from the stationary phone. There were no erratic movements or sudden accelerations indicated in the final telemetry packets. The extraction was controlled and executed without triggering any secondary acoustic or physical alarms. The digital silence perfectly preceded the physical disappearance of the hostage into the night. The precise nature of this digital extraction highlights the critical importance of forensic integrity. The investigators needed a perfectly preserved physical environment to complement the flawless digital timeline. The electronic data provides the chronological skeleton of the abduction event. The physical evidence must provide the biological identity of the individuals responsible for the crime. Sophisticated digital extraction demands an equally sophisticated forensic response from local authorities. The federal task force relies entirely on the initial preservation of the primary crime scene. The transition from digital precision to physical contamination represents the greatest failure of this investigation. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos is currently facing intense scrutiny and a no-confidence vote. His department assumed immediate operational control of the Catalina Foothills residence on February 1st. The initial hours following a high-profile abduction dictate the entire trajectory of the prosecution. Local deputies are required to establish an impenetrable perimeter to protect microscopic forensic evidence. Reports confirm the sheriff department allowed extreme breaches of protocol at the active crime scene. The residential perimeter was reportedly compromised by multiple unauthorized individuals during the critical first hours. The most egregious procedural violation involved commercial food deliveries directly to the active site. Deputies allegedly allowed pizza delivery personnel to enter the physically contaminated operational zone. This catastrophic failure of basic investigative protocol essentially nullifies the integrity of the collected evidence. A defense attorney will immediately exploit this contamination to invalidate any future physical matching. The introduction of foreign biological material destroys the chain of custody required for federal prosecution. If a suspect is apprehended, their legal counsel will point directly to the pizza deliveries. They will argue the crime scene was a chaotic environment devoid of professional forensic standards. The blood discovered on the exterior porch belongs definitively to the missing elderly victim. The forensic analysis confirmed the biological origin of the fluid pooling near the entrance. However, any suspect DNA recovered near that blood pool is now legally highly vulnerable. The Federal Bureau must reconstruct a case using evidence gathered from a fundamentally corrupted environment. This massive procedural failure forces investigators to rely on secondary external data sources. The local police incompetence actively assists the perpetrators in evading long-term legal consequences. You should subscribe to Tracking Evil with John and share this analysis with your network. We will continue exposing these systemic failures that jeopardize the recovery of missing persons. The public must understand how local mismanagement destroys the potential for federal justice. The sheer incompetence of the initial response provides a massive loophole for the kidnappers. The Federal Bureau is now attempting to salvage a prosecution from a ruined foundation. The digital timeline remains perfectly intact, but the physical anchor points are hopelessly compromised. The sheriff department essentially handed the perpetrators a masterclass in reasonable doubt. The compromised DNA evidence significantly reduces the leverage federal agents have during potential negotiations. They cannot threaten the kidnappers with definitive physical proof of their presence at the scene. The forensic validity of the entire primary location is currently under severe legal threat. The investigators must look beyond the corrupted residents to identify the individuals responsible. They are tracking the digital and physical movements of the suspects before they arrived. The catastrophic failure at the house forces the investigation outward into the surrounding community. If the local DNA evidence is legally void, what physical evidence does the Federal Bureau actually have left to trace? The visual data from the severed security camera provides the only physical profile of the perpetrator. The infrared optics of the residential network captured a singular entity operating in total darkness. The suspect manually disabled the device at exactly 1:47 in the morning. Before the visual feed terminated, the camera recorded several highly specific identifying characteristics. The individual wore a facial covering to defeat facial recognition algorithms during the physical approach. They held a standard illumination device directly in their mouth while neutralizing the exterior lens. This specific behavioral trait indicates they required bilateral manual dexterity to sever the network connection. The suspect also wore a highly recognizable Ozark Trail hiker backpack during the covert operation. Federal investigators immediately recognized the evidentiary value of this specific mass-produced retail item. The Federal Bureau is currently executing a massive data extraction of regional retail transaction records. Agents are actively reviewing thousands of purchase logs from surrounding commercial distribution centers and retailers. They must cross-reference every single cash and credit purchase of that specific backpack model. The logistics of tracing a widely available consumer product require immense computational and analytical resources. The investigators are filtering purchase timestamps against geographic proximity to the Catalina Foothills residential neighborhood. They are searching for a digital anomaly that correlates with the physical infiltration timeline perfectly. The backpack likely contained the specialized tools required to bypass the residential security perimeter silently. The suspect understood exactly how to defeat the digital infrastructure but failed to conceal their equipment. This critical operational oversight provides the federal task force with a definitive physical tracking vector. The infrared footage also allows forensic analysts to calculate the approximate biometric dimensions of the suspect. They can estimate the height and biomechanical gait of the individual approaching the residential entrance. Every single frame of the recorded video clip is currently undergoing intense federal pixel enhancement. The federal laboratory is attempting to identify any microscopic reflective anomalies on the tactical clothing. The suspect prepared meticulously for the digital evasion but left a glaring physical contradiction behind. The meticulous nature of the visual severance conflicts directly with the violent biological evidence discovered. The investigators must reconcile the calculated digital approach with the chaotic reality of the primary scene. The physical condition of the residence presents a terrifying logistical paradox for federal behavioral profilers. The interior of the Catalina Foothills home was discovered in an absolutely immaculate physical condition. Law enforcement observed zero physical indicators of a violent struggle within the primary living spaces. The furniture remained perfectly undisturbed, and the structural environment showed no signs of forced entry. This pristine internal environment contradicts the horrifying biological reality discovered immediately outside the primary residence. Forensic technicians confirmed a significant pool of blood located directly on the exterior front porch. Laboratory analysis definitively matched this biological fluid to the 84-year-old missing victim. The presence of arterial blood indicates a sudden and severely violent physical trauma occurred outside. The investigators must determine exactly how the victim sustained such a massive exterior biological injury. If the perpetrators executed a forceful internal abduction, the interior should reflect a chaotic struggle. The absolute lack of internal disruption suggests the victim either opened the exterior door voluntarily. Alternatively, the attackers may have ambushed the elderly woman the exact millisecond she stepped outside. This spatial contradiction is further complicated by the operational status of the secondary access points. The rear exterior doors of the residence were discovered deliberately propped open by the perpetrators. This specific tactical decision creates a massive analytical problem for the federal task force entirely. The attackers seemingly secured a rear exit route before initiating the violent frontal assault outside. They established a clear path of least resistance through the interior of the primary property. The blood pool on the porch suggests the extraction occurred rapidly at the front entrance. The open rear doors indicate a prolonged systemic infiltration of the entire residential structural footprint. We are analyzing these exact spatial contradictions daily, so subscribe to Tracking Evil with John. Your subscription ensures you receive our continuous analytical updates regarding these terrifying physical evidence discrepancies. The federal agents are mapping these environmental anomalies to understand the precise sequence of physical events. The perpetrators orchestrated an assault designed to resemble a chaotic home invasion while remaining entirely surgical. They controlled the digital environment perfectly while leaving a contradictory trail of extreme physical violence. This was not a standard, opportunistic crime executed by unorganized local criminal elements seeking wealth. The sophisticated manipulation of the physical environment indicates a highly organized and targeted tactical operation. The blood on the porch represents a catastrophic deviation from their otherwise flawless digital timeline. The pristine interior suggests the victim was targeted with overwhelming speed and absolute physical precision. The investigators must now determine why a seemingly perfect extraction required such severe physical violence. The contradictory nature of the crime scene sets the stage for a much darker revelation entirely. The physical evidence simply does not align with the standard parameters of a financial ransom abduction. The sheer complexity of the infiltration points toward a completely different psychological motivation driving the attackers. The federal task force is analyzing these exact physical parameters to uncover the true objective. The physical anomalies surrounding the Catalina Foothills property initially suggested a deeply flawed financial extraction. Law enforcement operated under the premise that the perpetrators sought a rapid monetary exchange. The subsequent communications received by the family permanently altered the trajectory of the federal investigation. During early February, the captors delivered two distinct ransom notes demanding an exorbitant financial payout. The communications specifically mandated a transfer of $6 million using an untraceable cryptocurrency network. Federal agents immediately recognized the structural irregularities embedded within these specific extortion demands. A standard hostage situation relies entirely on verifying the biological status of the captive target. The perpetrators must provide definitive proof of life to ensure the financial transaction occurs successfully. The deadlines established within these two ransom notes expired without any verifying medical or visual data. The absolute lack of life verification indicates the $6 million demand is a calculated distraction. Former federal profilers currently categorize this operation as a highly sophisticated psychological terror campaign. The perpetrators are not attempting to secure decentralized currency from a prominent broadcast journalist. They are systematically executing a prolonged mental siege against the entire extended family network. This psychological warfare explains the meticulous digital evasion and the contradictory physical violence at the residence. The attackers inflicted targeted trauma to maximize the emotional devastation of the high-profile relatives. The absence of the necessary cardiac medication amplifies the psychological pressure on the prominent anchor. We must evaluate the viability of this extortion demand against the current forensic reality. Given the thoroughly corrupted biological evidence and the total lack of life verification, would you advise the family to process the $6 million cryptocurrency transfer? You should leave your analytical assessment in the comments below to help us understand the consensus. The Federal Bureau faces an impossible mathematical equation regarding the survival probability of the 84-year-old victim. Processing the digital transaction provides the attackers with unlimited global mobility without guaranteeing a safe return. Withholding the demanded funds accelerates the physiological deterioration of a hostage deprived of critical cardiac support. This is the exact paralyzing dilemma the psychological terror campaign was explicitly designed to create. The perpetrators constructed a scenario where every potential reaction from the family results in profound devastation. The demands for untraceable digital currency serve merely as a mechanism to prolong the agonizing uncertainty. The true currency of this abduction is the absolute terror inflicted upon a highly visible target. The local law enforcement contamination of the primary scene further empowers this psychological manipulation strategy. The attackers know the federal agents lack the definitive biological leverage required to force a resolution. The meticulous digital severance combined with the psychological warfare indicates a highly resourced and obsessive adversary. The federal task force must now navigate a threat matrix that defies standard hostage negotiation protocols. The investigation is no longer a simple pursuit of individuals seeking a rapid financial windfall. It is a desperate digital hunt for a faceless entity executing a masterclass in psychological destruction. The federal silence is a direct response to this unprecedented escalation in operational complexity. The behavioral analysts recognize that publicizing the ransom details simply rewards the perpetrators with national attention. Restricting the flow of information deprives the attackers of the global audience they desperately desire. The investigative focus has shifted entirely from financial tracking to advanced linguistic and behavioral analysis. Forensic linguists are currently dismantling the syntax and phrasing of the two distinct ransom communications. They are searching for regional dialects or specialized terminology that might reveal the geographic origin of the suspects. Every digital artifact associated with the cryptocurrency wallet addresses is undergoing intense federal cryptographic review. The task force is attempting to map the intended routing network to identify the financial infrastructure of the perpetrators. This meticulous analysis requires absolute operational security to prevent the attackers from altering their digital methodology. We must acknowledge the brutal reality of the current investigative status on day 59. There is no impending resolution, and the Federal Bureau is operating in a state of absolute secrecy. The prominent television anchor remains indefinitely suspended from her national broadcast responsibilities during this ongoing crisis. The federal media blackout represents a critical tactical shift in the management of this abduction. Investigators are restricting all public appeals to protect extremely fragile back-channel negotiations with the captors. Alternatively, this operational silence means the psychological terror campaign has escalated with a new undisclosed threat. The federal agents hold the exact intelligence dictating this sudden transition to strict clandestine protocols. They are currently executing a massive retroactive analysis of the neighborhood security infrastructure. The task force is aggressively reviewing all residential surveillance data dating back to January 11. This specific chronological focus suggests the perpetrators maintained active physical surveillance of the target for weeks. The attackers likely monitored the daily routines and medical vulnerabilities of the 84-year-old victim long before the extraction. This sustained observation period allowed them to map the precise digital perimeter of the cardiac pacemaker. The terrifying reality is that immense wealth and international fame offer zero protection against a dedicated predator. The family utilized advanced security networks and resided in a highly affluent geographical location. The perpetrators systematically bypassed every single protective measure with chilling mechanical efficiency and total digital awareness. The federal task force is attempting to trace a ghost operating outside the standard parameters of criminal behavior. The current lack of resolution leaves the community existing in a state of perpetual hypervigilance. The exact reason for the sudden federal silence remains securely locked within classified intelligence briefings. The public is left observing a horrifying void where a prominent public figure previously existed. The daily absence of the necessary cardiac medication continues to dictate the biological urgency of the search. The investigators are racing against a physiological clock that cannot be paused or negotiated with. The lack of biological evidence due to the compromised scene severely limits the federal tracking capabilities. The digital telemetry data from the pacemaker remains the only flawless evidence currently possessed by law enforcement. The silence from the perpetrators forces the investigators to analyze the negative space of the crime. The psychological devastation inflicted upon the family continues to compound with every passing silent hour. The Federal Bureau is utilizing every available technological resource to pierce the operational security of the attackers. The task force is compiling massive cellular tower dumps from January 11 through the date of the abduction. They are filtering thousands of mobile device pings to isolate any anomalous digital presence near the residence. This retroactive data mining represents the most viable strategy for identifying the pre-operational surveillance team. The entire nation is watching an invisible adversary successfully outmaneuver the most advanced investigative agencies. The terrifying truth is that some targets are selected precisely because their suffering will be broadcast globally. The media blackout is the only defensive mechanism the family currently possesses against this psychological siege. We are left waiting for a digital anomaly or a critical error from an incredibly disciplined adversary. A heart monitor is not merely a standard medical necessity during a federal abduction. It functions strictly as a localized global positioning system for specialized federal investigators. The Internet of Things fundamentally altered how law enforcement tracks modern criminal extractions. Devices previously utilized solely for personal health monitoring now provide immutable forensic telemetry. The digital footprint generated by an 84-year-old patient is constant. Every cardiac event and Bluetooth synchronization creates a permanent chronological record on external servers. The federal task force utilizes these specific electronic anchors to reconstruct physical movements. They calculate the precise speed and direction of the suspects using signal degradation. Investigators measure the microsecond delays in data transmission to map the extraction route. This digital precision requires an absolute baseline of uncontaminated physical evidence to succeed. Local law enforcement inherently lacks the advanced procedural training required for these operations. Their catastrophic mismanagement of the Catalina Foothills property demonstrates a severe systemic vulnerability. A perfectly preserved digital timeline becomes legally worthless without matching biological material. Allowing unauthorized civilian personnel into an active abduction zone destroys all forensic validity. Federal prosecutors cannot introduce microscopic evidence if the chain of custody is compromised. The legal threshold for a corrupted crime scene is surprisingly easy to breach. Defense attorneys capitalize on these exact local law enforcement failures to dismantle cases. The public must recognize that early police incompetence actively shields sophisticated criminal networks. We constantly analyze what this specific case teaches us about the fragility of forensic integrity. The most advanced digital surveillance cannot compensate for fundamental failures in initial scene preservation. The technical data indicates a flawless extraction, but the physical reality remains chaotic. This catastrophic intersection of advanced technology and procedural incompetence dictates the current investigation. The Federal Bureau is now attempting to construct a prosecution without a physical foundation. The digital ghost of the abducted victim provides the only untainted evidence remaining available. The entire federal investigation circles back to the terrifying reality of day 59. The 84-year-old hostage remains completely separated from her required daily medication. Her internal pacemaker battery represents the only active component keeping the telemetry potentially relevant. The physiological deterioration of the elderly target operates entirely independent of the federal negotiations. The central question remains entirely focused on the classified intelligence enforcing the media blackout. The Federal Bureau possesses the exact reason why the prominent broadcast journalist remains silent. They intercepted specific communications indicating a threat level that supersedes standard public relations strategies. The federal gag order serves as a necessary tactical shield against a highly sophisticated adversary. The psychological terror campaign continues indefinitely, without providing any definitive biological proof of life. The federal silence will inevitably break as this physiological countdown reaches its inevitable conclusion. And when the unsealed documents finally drop, we will dissect the forensic data right here. You must subscribe and enable notifications to receive that critical analytical update immediately upon release. The federal investigators are still calculating the exact parameters of that initial digital severance. The most chilling forensic data point is not the biological fluid left on the exterior porch. It is the exact physical distance the cellular phone was moved to trigger the disconnect. At exactly 2:28 in the morning, the mobile device crossed that communication threshold. The unidentified suspects understood precisely how many feet were required to permanently blind the monitoring system.